So I want to just go over briefly what we're going to talk about tonight. So the first is just a recap and some basic information on what the current tax system is and how things are allocated. The next is the process for implementing this new sales tax. And then we'll talk a little bit about the proposal that we're making regarding that public safety sales tax. And then we'll talk about the public safety needs and why the tax is being requested, what the effect on the citizens will be, and then how the tax will be administered. So this whole thing came about because as part of the commission's goals, one of them was to create a funding source other than the general fund for public safety. The public safety taxes the general fund pretty heavily. As you'll see later, it's about 41% of the general fund goes to public safety. And so we needed to look at another way to fund that so that we have funds in the city for other options, debt reduction, property tax relief, items like that. So the sales tax committee met to confirm the interagency cooperation between the police and fire departments. We discussed the police and fire department needs, and we discussed ways to fund these improved services that we can offer. And then we did see some projections from Deputy Administrator Carlson regarding possible proceeds from the new tax. All said and done, we have identified the costs associated with the needs of those departments, and we've developed an expenditure plan to address those things. So one is the amount of the proposed sales tax, the cost versus the expected proceeds, and then how the tax will be administered. Right now, the current sales tax for the city of Dickinson is at 6.5%. So 5% of that goes to the state of North Dakota, and then the remaining 1.5% is distributed back to the city. So by comparison, looking at some of the budget considerations we have here, the preliminary 2019 budgets that have been presented or discussed at the city level, the police department is looking at $5,676,594. The fire department is looking at $2,032,415. So the total budgets of the public safety departments in the city are $7 million, roughly $7.7 million. Both of those are funded through general fund dollars, and the total amount of general fund dollars available is just under $19 million. So public safety does account for 41% of the general fund based on the preliminary statements. So what we're proposing is implementing another half-cent sales tax that would go to a vote of the citizens of Dickinson on the November ballot. I've presented you with a copy of the petition that was circulated, and more than the required number were certified by the city auditor's office. So we have qualified under the city code to have that petition considered for the November ballot. What would happen is the sales tax proceeds can only be allocated by the city commission to public safety purposes. So instead of taking that $7.7 million out of the general fund, you'd have some amount from the sales tax to offset that and free up some general fund dollars. 60% of the tax proceeds, based on the way the ordinance was drafted for the petition, will go to replace funding that's currently drawn from the general fund and distributed to the police and fire departments as part of their annual budgets. Okay, so that's money that they're guaranteed to have then that won't have to come from the general fund. And again, this does leave more money to offset other needs such as property tax relief or debt payments. The half-cent sales tax will be collected only within the city limits of Dickinson and the incorporated area. It would increase our current tax from 6.5% to 7%. Based on the projections from our Deputy City Administrator Carlson, it looks to generate about $1.3 million in 2019 and $2.63 million in 2020. And that jump is because for 2019, we're only going to have a partial year of collections. So we're not assuming that the economy in Dickinson will explode that amount to compensate for that difference. But we do anticipate only a partial year of distributions or collections in 2019 because of the timing of the ordinance and the implementation schedule of the tax commissioner. So just to explain that differential there. The proceeds will go 30% to the fire department, 30% to the police department, and then 40% is held back as a reserve for public safety projects. So when there's bigger things that come up, you have an equipment failure, unexpected large costs. It's not a tax on the general fund or a tax on the city to figure out where that money is going to come from. You'll have those reserves to fall back on. So as a comparison to other cities, if we would go up to 7%, Grand Forks, so of course all these cities have the 5% mandated by the state. So we would be going from 1.5% to 2%. So Grand Forks actually has a 2.25% sales tax. Jamestown has a 2% tax. And then Fargo, Minot, and West Fargo all have 2% tax for their own, and they also have an additional 0.5% tax that's levied by their county. So they actually are at 7.5%. So, and then Wilson has an extra 1% county tax on top of their 2%. So by comparison, for our cities in the state that we would consider our peers, 7% would not be out of line. So the estimated impact, assuming 2019 income would be 1.3 million, the allocation would be 500,000 and 500,000 to each department. And the reason for that is, for budgeting purposes, we want you to know how much to be able to put towards those. And with the tax income being a little bit uncertain every year, the petition and the ordinance language sets a set amount that's guaranteed. So the way the petition is written, the first $1 million or 60%, whichever is greater. So in the first year, you'll see that the 1 million is obviously greater than the 60% because we're only anticipating 1.3 million. So, but for budgeting purposes, you're going to have that 500,000, so you don't have to try and guess. So that should help with the budgeting process. The surplus funds would be allocated by the City Commission for public safety special projects or reserved for future public safety uses. So that would be at your discretion, year to year, what you'd want to do with those funds in terms of special projects. Looking at 2020, if we assume that there's a 2.63 million projected income, the police department would have 791,000 offset of their budget, fire department the same, and then you'd have surplus reserves of just over $1 million. So why do we need this public safety sales tax? So for one, we have the health and safety of the personnel. We're looking at making sure they have the proper equipment, that it's timely, that they're not using outdated materials, and that they have the equipment they need to go into, a crimes, if it's a police department, going into an encounter with a, I guess I'm gonna, city prosecutor, so I say future defendant, but so with a criminal, being safe, or with the fire department, they're going into the scene, that they have what they need to get there. Additional equipment, as the city continues to enhance, develop, I'm sure you've all heard from the police and fire departments that they feel a little bit inadequate in being able to respond to some of the outlying areas as quickly as they need. They don't necessarily have all the things that they need. So funding additional equipment would be one of those options. Enhanced trainings, enhanced fire standards of coverage and response time, enhanced volunteer firefighting services and support, which of course, again, when you train those volunteers, it does take some of the pressure off of the full-time firefighters. And then strengthen our response to illegal drugs in our community. I know that you've had presentations from the Drug Task Force, and things aren't getting better in that regard. And so we need to make sure that our police department keeps up with that. And then enhance school safety. Of course, that's a huge issue nationwide. Ideally, getting some additional school resource officers in there to curtail some of those issues. So. And then in terms of the surplus, some of the items that have been identified by the departments, those capital expenditures and equipment replacements. You've got radios, air packs, and then unexpected repairs to equipment and apparatus. We all know. We hope the fire truck is always working as it should, but sometimes we have those equipment failures that we don't expect, and then the apparatus that the police and fire departments have are expensive, and so trying to replace those spur of the moment without having those reserve funds can be taxing on the city. The other concept that was discussed is a training facility. Right now, they don't have a real solid training facility available for either one of them. The fire department consistently has state fighters coming here to try and train, and we've got some really great opportunities for training here, but they don't have a great space. And so possibly doing that. So the surplus uses could be used to design, engineer, and develop that facility. And you'll see on this slide here, we went out 3 years, so you could first of all read the slide on the projector, but just get an idea.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we've got the police department, fire department with their projected general fund subsidies, from the tax, and then if you look at capital equipment replacements, just based on what Deputy City Administrator Carlson has heard through the budget talks, a good estimate coming from those departments, and then setting aside some dollars in 2020 and 2021 for design of the facility, and then beginning construction. And if we'd extrapolate those out further through 2022 and on, there'd be additional funds going to that training facility that the city could fund with cash from those sales tax proceeds as opposed to another debt. But we'd have the cash to do that on an ongoing basis. So, from the fire department's perspective, they look at things they could do with additional dollars, improve firefighting services, the personnel and engines. They would ideally get a brush truck at Station 2 to just be a one-time purchase. That would be a good use for those surplus capital funds. Funding for emergency medical training, and then funding, I'm sure you've heard Chief Sivak talk about sometimes they get there before the ambulance does, and so they're administering some of those first care on scene. So doing additional training for that. And then funding for annual fire service based physicals for all the personnel. So that'd be volunteer and full-time to make sure that they are healthy when they are going into those situations. From the police department's perspective, again, funding for specialized training. So some of those things are, some of the SWAT, the drug task force, and then again, creation of juvenile services division. So ideally what they'd like is an additional school resource officer to get into the elementary schools. I'm sure some of you are hearing that, kids are being exposed to things earlier and earlier, and waiting to just have that school resource officer at the high school. Often some of those problems have occurred 2 or 3 years prior. So being able to get into the elementary schools would be a huge benefit for the police department. And then putting an investigator in the CIU for specializing in juvenile cases. I'm sure some of you have seen some of the articles about the increase in juvenile cases in the area. There's not really someone here that's specialized to address those cases in a way that comes from more of a has the psychological background to deal with juveniles as opposed to adult defendants and things like that. So, and juvenile victims as well. So those are some things that would be helpful from the police department's standpoint. So who will pay the tax? Everyone that shops in Dickinson, so that's residents and non-residents who rely on public safety while in Dickinson. So it spreads the burden, as opposed to pulling things from the general fund or relying on a property tax source. It spreads the burden over users of the system, right? And so that's part of why the sales tax is a better option for us. And then it will be subject to the standard sales tax exemptions. So you're looking at food and food products for human consumption are exempt from sales tax. Your utilities for electric, water, natural gas, those are exempt from sales tax. Gasoline and prescription drugs. So everything that's currently exempt will remain exempt from this tax. On the next slide, you'll see some of the impact of what does this additional half-cent sales tax mean to you. So I had to run the numbers on these twice because I wasn't sure. I thought I had a typo, but it is 0.03 cents, so not even a full cent on a fast food meal. It would be 0.15 cents to the cost of a $30 pair of pants, and it would add $2 to the cost of a $400 dishwasher. So you can see the impact on an individual scale overall would be pretty nominal, but when you spread that over the entire economic base that shops here, it becomes pretty powerful in terms of the total dollars generated. So if obviously I will field questions here this evening, but if anyone has more questions or wants more information or wants to assist in getting this passed in November, they can email dickinsonpublicsafetytax@gmail.com. And then we will be doing some community presentations at varying times of the day, varying days of the week to try and allow a variety of people to come discuss the idea and voice any concerns they have and really get some information out to the public on this. So we have a good educational campaign. Do you have any questions for me?
All right. Any questions for Ms. Kripe? Good job.